If there is no other comment on this at this point, I would like, if there's a board member interested in making a motion regarding seeking outside counsel, to follow up on this.
I'll move it.
You want to make the motion? Okay.
I'll second.
We seek outside
Second.
counsel in the way that described for it by
Use your mic.
Martinez.
Say that again,
I
Carl.
move that we seek outside counsel as recommended by Mr. Martinez on the issue that's just come before us, and any additional wording that may be appropriate.
Very good. There's a second was?
Carl, if I may, if I could just add that in what you had said, to clarify, for the purpose of bringing the information to the Pension Regulatory Commission to make sure that the decisions made by this board are appropriate in line with the advice given and the regulations that are still in force as we best understand them.
Agreed.
And my second was from
One or the
Kevin?
other of us, yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's do a roll call on this.
Mr. Bartolino?
Yes.
Mr. Doran?
Yes.
Mr. Gainsbourg?
Yes.
Mrs. Karp?
Yes.
Mr. Myers?
Yes.
Dr. Swanson?
Yes.
Mr. Talier?
Yes.
Mr. Wolf?
Yes.
Mrs. Mitchell?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, if I may, before we move on,
Sure.
because I think what we just determined as a formal procedure will stand on its own merits, given the due course we just talked about. But I'd like to comment from a board perspective and from a personal perspective as a member of this board about really two things that come to mind after having talked to this reporter on Friday afternoon. And the words that come to mind are not anger, but more disappointment and discouragement. Because for the last 6 months, this board, including Mr. Wolf, and Jim, you are part of this board, even though I think in a lot of different ways, both in behavior and in the messages you're sending, you have not sent the signal that you want to be a member of this board. But since April, we have had a number of discussions, formal, in the form of discussions at this board, in open public session about the role of the board, the activities of the board, the processes that we all have endorsed as a board. We spent another 7.5 hours in a retreat on a Saturday, and where the agenda would have had us go through numerous topics, we spent probably 5 of those hours on how do we work together as a team, how do we operate as a full board, not as a board of 9 plus 1, because this is a 10-member board with Dr. Ferguson being the 10th non-voting member, but how to operate as a board of the whole. So I guess I'm disappointed in the sense that despite discussions, facilitated discussions about behaviors, about what we expected of each other, and some very candid conversations in the context of that, there was an agreement by everybody in that session, including yourself, where we walked out of there, that we would try to do some of those things that we all held each other accountable to. So I'm disappointed that on Friday afternoon, after 6 months and multiple discussions, for us to...
No. No.
Get
No.
out of here, please. Now.
No.
Okay. Go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you. After 6 months, for us to hear as a board, whether individual or not, from a newspaper about a concern that you expressed to a newspaper reporter without any evidence of that concern in any forum, in any fashion, before we heard about it through the reporter, is discouraging and disappointing. I could go through a number of things in detail that we covered in all of those sessions about the roles and responsibility of the board and the code of ethics that a board member is held accountable to, including acting not as an individual, but as a board member. And Friday was an action of an individual, and you represented yourself as a board member. That's disappointing. It's also discouraging because we talked specifically about not doing those kinds of things together, and we held each other responsible for, if there's an issue, to bring it to the table in the context of the roles and the chain of command that we talked about explicitly in that board. And you agreed in that board that that was the appropriate way to do things. And yet Friday indicated that despite the words, the actions don't fit, Jim. and that's concerning, and it's disappointing. And I think that's where I would leave the question back to you of what other surprises are out there, Jim, that you'd like to share with us? What other surprises or concerns that you've been holding in your pocket for 6 months would you like to share with us? What other things are we going to have to figure out is on your mind before we ask you to clarify them for us? And I say this with no facetiousness, no smart remark, but what's the next story we're going to have to chase? Okay? What are you going to cry wolf on next time, Jim? And I mean that in all sincerity, because we have no way of predicting what's going to come. And I ask the other thing, ironically, and this is rhetorical, after 6 months, for somebody who has represented in words that you were in agreement with all the principles we talked about, but in actions, including the action of not even disclosing, and you're the only board member at this point, 6 months in, who has still not put up on a website who you are and who you are to the public in terms of a bio and what you represent. I find that interesting. So they're the behaviors and the actions consistent with what is actually what we see, Jim, isn't consistent. So it's disappointing, it's discouraging, and actually I'm a little bit concerned about how we work from here. That's all I have.